Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartofilis.
Hey, Coach Ryan, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing, John?
I'm doing great. Really excited to have you on. We've been texting for a while, and you've been all over the place, right? Internationally, back and forth with teams and the whole situation there. I mean, it's been crazy to do it, and you've been right in the middle of that, and it's definitely a lot of fun having you on and jumping into all the experiences that you've had.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. Like I said, during COVID, it's definitely a little bit different, and I feel like it's been going on for a little bit more than a year now, but a lot of places trying to get back to a little bit of normalcy with, the leagues, with fans, with, staff, everything. So it's a little bit of a process. I think it's going to take a little bit longer, but, looking forward to get back to it here soon.
Definitely. I mean, right. Obviously, we're going to talk all about all the cool stuff you're doing now, but taking it all the way back to when you first kind of got into whether it's coaching or just this whole basketball world in general. I mean, being a manager at San Jose State, right, and doing stuff. I mean, did you always know you're going to go into coaching and stuff, or was it something that you wanted to be around the team and it just happened?
Yeah, actually, taking it back a little further. So I played 3 sports, all going through high school and everything. I was, basketball, baseball, soccer. And actually, I think what originally got me into coaching, when I think the first travel team I played for was 6th grade. I actually had a couple like AAU basketball. I had some younger coaches, I think guys who played varsity basketball at the time. And it was the first time I had been around coaches who were a little bit younger. And that kind of piqued my interest into getting into coaching from the start. And so I was like, if these guys can do it, that'd be cool once I get to around that age. So actually, as I was playing through high school, I started, coaching some younger teams. I started my own AAU team while I was in high school, playing in the off season. And I went to community college at first, and the original plan was to play with the JC team that I was at. So I was playing with them during the off season, but, right around when the season was about to start, I got an offer to coach a high school team where I had been before as an assistant. And so that was just an offer that I jumped on. And that kind of got me full time into coaching while I was in school. And so once I transferred from Butte College where I was at, I ended up going to San Jose State after. So that was kind of like my intro there, where they'd saw my background. I gave my resume that I'd been working, and it was a really easy transition where they needed some help. And that's kind of what got me into San Jose State at the time, working with the team there.
It's awesome. Right after school, you ended up jumping into all these things with that was the D League, but all these other opportunities. I mean, being a manager there, I mean, being at the original D League was just, there was so much, right? It was so new at that time, right? There was so many things happening. I mean, how did being a manager in school prepare you for what you were about to see in the D League?
Yeah, I would say, originally my goal, even though I've always wanted to be at the highest level, I never had the connections in professional basketball. So I didn't know if that was going to be easy to get into. So my main reason for, getting a degree was to coach, high level D1 in college. I thought that was more realistic, not having the connections. If I work in college basketball, I could get there. Upon leaving San Jose State, I had applied or sent my resume out to every single D1 school in the country. Like, I was literally going through all the conferences and crossing them off, sending them off to every staff, D2 schools, D3, NAIA, JCs of, whether it was Indeed or any place I could find, job offers. I didn't end up getting one interview, actually. I had some people who responded, but I never got an interview. And actually at the time, the D League, I think there were 15, maybe 16 teams at the time. They actually still listed the contact info of a lot of the coaches, so I could get my resumes into them. And the first job that I actually got offered was with the Utah Flash. It was an internship with them. But I think about a couple weeks or a month after the coach offered me that job, the team folded. So he reached out to me. He's like, hey, the team's not going to be in business anymore. Sorry about this. And that's where I got an interview with the Bakersfield Jam, and they had offered an internship. And that's kind of started everything, with me working in professional basketball. And that was actually the year of the lockout. So the NBA wasn't going at the time. That was kind of a long process. And so our season started without the NBA going. I think that was 2011.
everyone, just kind of similar to what this year's been. I mean, definitely the lockout was another whirlwind just a few years ago, and we kind of forget about it, and then we bring up 2011. It's like, wait, okay, that was pretty significant. My missing games and all that stuff did obviously shake things up, not to the extent as right now, but it did obviously change things. But the one thing I want to key on, I mean, obviously, right, thank you for sharing all this stuff about teams full, and that all shakes things up so much for you. But you were part of the Bakersfield gym, and that year, that Bakersfield gym, those few years of the team's existence, I've had Coach George Giannopoulos come on, Coach Nelson, even Brian Levy, who's now with the Fort Wayne Mad Ants, all talk about the Bakersfield Mafia and how everyone from that team right now is going on and doing big things. So, I mean, what was it like being a part of what sounds like one of the greatest teams in D-League history?
Yeah, it's funny because me and George were roommates actually that year. Wow. So that was our first job out of college. So we were roommates at the time. Nelson was with us. Brian Levy was, basically like our GM there at the time with, Will Voigt, who's been all over the place, John Bryant, the training staff, everybody's gone all over the place. So it was fun because a lot of guys that you met, even if you didn't work with, had a lot of the same stories that had been through Bakersfield. So that was definitely a jumping off point. And I think, the great thing about it that Will did for everyone was he gave everybody a chance to work. It wasn't just, hey, stay behind the scenes, or you're an intern, so you're just going to do all the grunt work. Even though you have to do some sort of grunt work, he still gives you a chance to grow and to learn and to, be better through that experience. So I think that was a really big thing. Everybody there loved basketball. They put all their effort and energy into it. And so they did a really good job of getting a lot of basketball people there. And, most of us still stay in touch, as well. So it's good seeing everybody going on to different places from Bakersfield.
If the name is cool as the Bakersfield Mafia, you kind of have to stay. I feel like you're obligated to stay in touch. I mean, that name is way too cool. And it's funny because I had George and Nelson on right at or kind of earlier on in the pod's existence, and they didn't mention it. And then when Brian Levy came on, he brought up that name. I'm like, that's the coolest thing ever. Like that's that is actually awesome. And the fact that there's that there's that team, like this is 10 years later and we're still talking about it, which I don't think many of those teams in the league at the time, those D-League teams still have the camaraderie. It's pretty cool thinking about that. But that was just one of your many stops, right? I mean, whether right after that, were you still an intern at some of these other roles, whether you're with the Timberwolves or the Austin Toros, like what was kind of going on there so early on in your career, but obviously you're kind of learning so many things at all these different teams.
Yeah, I want to say it was actually interesting with Bakersfield because I left probably about mid-season-ish, right when the lockout was ending. So we were actually going to play, South Bay Lakers at the time, and I got a call from Minnesota as we were on the road, and so I didn't check it as we were in the van traveling down there. But once I got there, I had a message from the Timberwolves saying, "Hey, this is so and so from the Timberwolves. We have a video opening. Call us back if you're interested." And I was like, well, that's, kind of interesting how they got my contact info. And so I reached back out once I got into town after we finished our game and everything. And they said, they had a video spot open. They came across my resume somehow from another connection they had in the league. And, through that process, they ended up offering me position. And at the time I was like, this is going to be too hard a opportunity to pass up. There's not very often that the NBA comes calling and, actually offers you a position. So it wasn't the easiest thing telling, the team that I was going to leave. But I think most people understood at the time, like, hey, if you get an opportunity like that, jump on it. And so the Timberwolves actually said, as soon as you can get out here, because their season was starting. So I flew out right around Christmas time, got out there and just went right to work. I was basically the third video coordinator, kind of like a video intern for them throughout the season. And that was kind of a jumping off point for a lot of positions where I ended up doing essentially the same thing with the Spurs the following year. Being with the Spurs during training camp, the Toros during the season, kind of in that, video role or helping with the coaching staff a lot, that jumped off into a lot of the other spots that I had been at, but all of them super unique experiences, working with those coaches. Will Voigt from Bakersfield came from that San Antonio coaching tree, and then getting to, see what Rick Adelman did and kind of being in Pop's system early on. It was a great place to learn, and a lot of stuff that I've taken from all those places has just been very important to my development over the years too.
That stuff's huge, and it's awesome thinking about where there's always one team that we bring up, and then the fact that like even back then the D-League team and the NBA teams are working so close in harmony is really cool to think about how you're kind of working with both and learning from both, but also taking on different roles. And then right? For a lot of them, maybe you're in the video room, but I noticed with the Magic, you were actually called an advanced scout. I mean, what was it like there, like taking what you learned in the video room and now applying it to actually real formative data on players that people are going to use to make decisions?
Yeah, it was unique because actually during our home games, the first time I did more advanced scouting type stuff was with Bakersfield. So we actually, it's a lot of, getting other teams' play calls, writing down, lists of what everybody does, like a running call sheet of every single play at every single, time the offense comes down the court, any other notes that you have. And so that was the first time I kind of got into that. And I think it was at the time Jacques Vaughn went out to Orlando, and I'd been in touch with one of the old Spurs workers at the time, and they were looking for some West Coast advanced scouts. And so being me based on the West Coast, it was easy for me to kind of get into that. And that was my first kind of like, job that was taken away like off the court. And it was a great learning experience getting to see all this information they wanted. But it didn't really feel like me at the time either, because I was so far removed from being on the court, sweating with the guys, going through drills, doing all that stuff, kind of taking the interactions out of it. You feel kind of separated from it. So it was a really valuable experience and you learn a lot, but to me, that wasn't totally me. So it was a unique experience. I know how valuable it is for the coaches to get all that information, especially when I think the first time in Minnesota when, scouts wouldn't send their, reports over soon enough, you'd see how mad they were. Like, I don't know any of these calls and nothing's coming through. So you see how valuable it is as well for everybody to do their part in those different roles.
Everyone, I mean, no matter what it is, everyone plays such an integral role in the team happening, right? I mean, one thing can happen without the other. And it's interesting about how the whole kind of machine of a team maybe gets going. But right, you mentioned how you wanted to be more, you felt like kind of away from the court and you wanted to get onto it more and do stuff like that and kind of do what you really wanted to do maybe at the start of your journey. And those were maybe all stepping stones. Talk to us a little bit about getting into coaching more, whether it was as an intern with the Erie Bayhawks or maybe later on even once you actually got to the G League, NBA, and you're doing stuff like that. I mean, what was that? How important was it for you to get back into coaching and be on the sidelines?
Yeah, I think it was really important. So probably the advice that I give, a lot of people getting into the business is, during the season, you have to have, especially if you're not like an ex-NBA player, had that international background of playing at the high level. If you really want to coach, you need to find a way to get onto the court. I was lucky to be able to, coach in high school and run some of the summer programs, do my own AAU team. And my way of continuing to coach in between seasons was still working players out in the off seasons, being active. I didn't do as many camps as some people did, but I'd work with, people individually, do some clinics. So I always felt I was active. That's how I was able to continue to stay in that coaching mold, even if I was in between internships and not doing as much on court stuff. When I got the first, when I went to the Erie Bayhawks under Bill Peterson, who was a heavy, player development guy who'd been with, the Milwaukee Bucks for a very long time in the pro game for a while. I was like really respected player development wise. It was kind of music to my ears when he's like, I don't want a guy who's just going to be, on the computer, watching video, cutting up tape. He's like, I want you on the floor, working, doing all that stuff. And to me, I was like, coach, say no more. I was like, that's exactly what I want to hear. So getting under him and him wanting me to be on the floor all the time and coaching, continuing to grow was a huge thing. He's actually with Baylor right now. They just won the national championship and I still stay in touch with him. And that really, helped being able to, kind of full-time year round, get, find your voice, getting used to, being back in the drills and learning from different people and kind of taking all the stuff I've learned and thought and implementing it, at that level. And it was really important to get back into that role. And, over the years, sometimes it gets, I don't know if disheartening is the right word, but, so many internships back to back and, kind of waiting for that time to get back onto the floor that sometimes, it hurts. Is super hard, but it felt like, a huge weight off my shoulders getting back into it. So it's been great being able to get back into it that way.
It's incredible, right? Having a mentor like that could really tell you, no, Ryan, I want you on the court right now, guys. Like, we don't want you just in the video. We want you doing what you want to do, but also it's going to help us. I mean, it's kind of beautiful, right? Thinking about how that all works out. And after all those years of being an intern, it all kind of paid off with, okay, now you're doing exactly what you want to do. You're always working in basketball, which is fun. but now it's exactly what you want to do, which I love hearing that. And it's heartwarming to know that ended up happening. Thinking about maybe though, like once you got started and you're at summer league with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Obviously that summer league is not different than the one we're about to see, and I'm excited to go this year. But maybe that first one, what's it like being an assistant coach on a summer league team where you're there for a month, you just meet the guys. Really, everything kind of happens so fast. I mean, how does it all go down?
Yeah, it was. So what had happened after Erie, I ended up getting a full-time assistant job with the Iowa Wolves. So this was my second time actually being back at the Timberwolves organization. And so that first year, I think Thibodeau was the coach at the time. So the way it was kind of set up for us was to have the staff come into training camp, observe, all the drills that they do, learning, the offense, defense, all the terminology of what they do so we can implement that into our system in Iowa. So if they end up sending any of their players, as they like to say in the G League, up to the G League, we can put those guys in that system. And it's just, there's not too much learning, there's not too much like, oh, we're running this system, they're running this system, we have to relearn all this stuff. So through that first year, I think they got to see us work. We interacted with the players on the floor, how we worked with them. And then going into that second season, we actually got to go and kind of do some pre-draft stuff, some free agent camps of Minnesota. And that's when they gave us, the go ahead that they wanted to bring us on for summer league out in Minnesota. So that was kind of a way for them to evaluate not just all the players, but coaches, see how you work on the floor with the guys and, kind of put that system in. John Lucas was the coach at the time. So it was kind of neat having our staff from Iowa there, part of the Minnesota staff, and then a lot of teams bring in some foreign coaches. So getting a mix of those guys as well. It was really neat. So getting to, work with the guys in Minnesota during our training camp, if you will, before summer league, and then, being out there during practice, seeing these guys in their journey, it was a lot of fun.
It's huge. And obviously, right, getting back to Timberwolves organization, you'd already been there before. I had some familiarity. Coming back then, doing what you actually want to do as an assistant coach, that must have been incredible. And thinking about how that all kind of comes full circle, and you're there with like the Iowa Wolves, and that at that point it was the G League, so you're really starting to get an introduction of maybe the G League changed so much in that last year. I mean, what was maybe the difference between what you had experienced in the D League before that, roles aside, and what you came back to when you were with the Iowa Wolves just a few years later?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing was obviously, I think how many teams, I think it had got to about 26, 27 teams. There were only a couple teams, at the time that weren't really affiliated. I know Denver and Portland was one, because our second year in Iowa, we actually had a few players from Denver with us when we had Brandon Goodwin, Thomas Welsh, who came with us, on during that time. But also I'd say just how close the teams operate with each other. And to me, I feel that the G League now, it's, when people talk about the G League and the NBA, I don't really see them as like separate organizations, separate leagues, because you have so many of the same people working together, so many players going back and forth now. I essentially see it as the same organization. And I feel at the time when I first got in with Bakersfield, that's what a lot of the teams were kind of working towards. When I was with Bakersfield, we were affiliated with the Clippers, the Raptors, and the Phoenix Suns all at the same time. And now a lot of teams are trying to go, more one-on-one partnerships. And so that's the biggest difference. And, you get a lot of people working. And I think a lot of organizations are starting to see the value in, if you use it the right way, how much you can develop some of these guys rather than, them just sitting on the bench and not getting any playing time. That's the biggest thing, because the reality is a lot of the players that are coming out into the NBA, they're just not ready to contribute right away. We get infatuated with guys like, Ayton, Doncic, Young, all these guys who come in right away and boom, they're stars. If you look at the majority of players that come in, a lot of them aren't ready, and the G League's a perfect scenario for them to actually get 20, 30, maybe 40 games in during the season, when with NBA teams, they might just be sitting on the bench and getting garbage time.
Thank you for sharing that on the G League, because obviously it's just something that's in the last few years has just become so huge. And if people really, I think even still, people maybe my age or that really haven't been around it and as much as obviously you have, don't really understand how huge it's become and how important it is for players that, right, maybe we get too focused on DeAndre Ayton and Luka Doncic and how well they're playing in the playoffs. But there's a lot of other guys that can help these teams win that just maybe need a little bit more of time to really grow in the G League. So it's really cool, right, thinking about your experience there. And those few years with the Timberwolves and then picking up everything there. I'm curious about maybe more your international stuff. We spoke about this a little bit off air in terms of how crazy it's been now with COVID, but even you were over there before COVID, or up in Canada. I'm curious maybe how that first year with the Halifax Hurricanes went, because I mean, like we kind of have talked about all the good stuff and how positive all this basketball stuff is, but sometimes disaster strikes and your head coach leaves a week into the season. I mean, how tough was it to maybe keep right the ship? I mean, keep things going after that happened.
Yeah, that was a really unique scenario, because what had happened there was we had been through, most of training camp, with the roster that coach had built and everything. And actually being through that was, you're just kind of ready going into the season, and being in an assistant role, your role and what you have to do is entirely different. And then, right before the season, coach ends up leaving, taking this other role in the organization. And he's kind of like, hey, here's your team. And actually what I was told is I was going to be the GM at the time. And so, finding a few guys who work in that system and everything, you're kind of looking, okay, you might be able to make a few changes here and there. But what I was told ended up being something different. And so the coach who ended up leaving at the time, he ended up taking the president role of the organization, and he also kept the GM role. And so a couple of those situations where, we're looking for new players, kind of like, hey, we can't make these moves. We got the guys. And actually I was told it wasn't maybe less than 2 weeks into the season, he ended up coming back because we didn't get off to a good start. And, he ends up coming back, wants me back in the other role, and then COVID hits. And so COVID ends up, canceling our season. And I was very fortunate to get that job in Vietnam before COVID hit. So I was one of the very, very lucky people that actually had work kind of not essentially guaranteed, but as good of a guarantee as you can get. Because if that didn't happen, then I could have still been without a job during this entire time. So COVID ended up getting canceled, and I was supposed to be leaving beginning of April, I think at the time, to go over to Vietnam, and Vietnam closed their borders like the last week of March. So it was about 10 days before I ended up going. And I ended up being stuck in the United States for probably another 6 months before I ended up leaving, getting my visa to be able to go during that season. So it was totally wild during, this last season, just being able to get over there during that start.
Definitely a wild time. I mean, international stuff maybe already confuses or becomes a little complicated to those of us in the States that don't really think about international ball as much. We only focus on the NBA, but thinking about maybe wrestling with COVID in the middle of a season, and your head coach is the GM now, and he's the president, all this stuff. Maybe I'm losing track of it, right? I'm going to have to listen to this a few times to make sure. I think I got it. I think I got what I was trying to say, right? But right, everything's kind of upside down. And then thinking about, right, thankfully having a job in Vietnam, being able to go there right once things started to maybe settle down a little bit with COVID. I mean, once you got there, I'm pretty sure things went pretty well, because you did get a Coach of the Year nomination. So how did that season go for you once you finally did get to play some basketball?
Yeah, it was unique because we were working with an expansion team for the first. So that was the first time me being with an expansion team, really building from the ground up. And it ended up being tough trying to build the roster, because you have the owner and, the GM trying to build the roster from their end, and us, me trying to build the roster, finding, watching almost every single game of, all the teams in the past, trying to evaluate the teams, their styles of play, trying to evaluate players. Okay, how could these guys fit in our system? And, they end up, you end up saying kind of the guys you like, and they end up signing a lot of these guys. And, you kind of get, forced with this roster initially. And, that was a tough situation, just kind of waiting. And, whether it's like, hey, this guy doesn't fit my system, and then they sign that guy, because this person likes him or whatever. So that was a tough situation at first, but getting over there was a lot better, because then you can really start the interactions, with the people. You can work with the guys on the floor. You can interact with ownership, front office, everybody. So getting over there was good. I would say, that at the time was unique about going to Vietnam was the league usually runs through the summer. And to me, if I'm not with the team, kind of how I was with, the Timberwolves and out at summer league, I'll just usually be working guys out. And here it was like, okay, now I can get another head coaching job for the summer. And then during the normal basketball season, I could go somewhere else afterwards. So that was a big reason why I took that job. But then with COVID pushing everything back, we didn't get started till September. I had to go through quarantine for a couple weeks, get started in September. I think our league started beginning of October. And so, going through, that system where, you get one import, one foreign player on your team, and then, the rest are mostly locals. It's different because your style becomes different, how you teach becomes different. Their level of play isn't as high, but it's growing super fast in Vietnam. And so it kind of makes you reevaluate yourself as a coach and what you can and can't do from, game plan, strategy, drills, everything you do with them, it becomes unique. So it was a huge learning experience for me on that end.
And there's so much to go into there because as learning experience is huge. I mean, I'm sure that whether it's the cultural barrier, the language barrier, all these things they play a huge role. And obviously, with the biggest thing would be now you transition into being the fullest head coach for the whole year. Right? There was no back and forth or this guy's coming down from one job. I mean, just starting with that, I mean, what was that like? Maybe, and you mentioned it a little bit in terms of having your own team and maybe even still struggling with some things as to how the makeup of your team is, but maybe going through the whole season as the full head coach for every single game. And what was that like in actually having the keys to the team the whole time?
Yeah, no, it was great because like you said, your voice is there, and you being able to actually, work, going through the system with a full staff, like, the staff having an assistant coach and a translator overseas, and working with the team, knowing that you can go from like a game to game basis is really important for that. And I think the biggest thing, after the season was them wanting me back and then being able to really build the team kind of how I wanted for the system I wanted. You start to, find guys who fit in with what you want to do. And that was the big focus of the off season. And that was another reason why I didn't come back. Part of it was because of COVID, but I could scout a little more. I could evaluate guys who would fit into, our system and kind of build up our team, kind of how I envisioned with, what local talent we had available. And so that was my goal originally. And that's kind of the reason that, it's a little frustrating not to be there now as I got this new job in Taiwan. But it was really interesting because you kind of end up playing the GM and basketball and head coaching role, playing both sides, trying to find, the right players who fit to the system, who, you're working with the salary cap. So you have to deal with that as well. Guys asking for a lot more money. And so, kind of drawing a hard line with some players where you're like, we can't afford you. We have to go somewhere else. That brings a whole nother side into it that, maybe as an assistant coach, you aren't thinking about, dealing with the money side of things and politics and all the other stuff that goes into it. So, that was a learning experience that you can't really duplicate anywhere else. That to me is super, super valuable.
You definitely can't read it in a textbook. And I obviously would never even get to, I talk to you about it all I want, but I would actually have to do it to even begin to understand what you went through, right? And going through all this. You mentioned maybe the system that you're building over there. And I'm curious as to maybe how that's maybe different, right? In Vietnam and in Lee, that's built up out of so many local players. It's so different from the other stops you had coaching, even as an assistant or even as the stints as you had as a head coach. I mean, what was that system maybe like, and how was it different compared to what you'd ever encountered in the past?
Yeah, I think, especially with my background, a lot of the concepts that you'll see in the NBA and the G League are very similar with, some of the spacing, some of the actions that we run. A lot of that, with some of the, drive and kick and being able to space the floor, some of the analytics come into play. We're trying to shoot the corner three or, finish in the paint, get into the free throw line. A lot of those basics you'll see is kind of, what we go for. The team we had originally in Vietnam wasn't necessarily built for that. We didn't have like a very, up-tempo team, guys who are really fast, who could get up and down the floor. So our execution had to be a little bit different. And so going into the second year, that's kind of what we were looking to build our team for, get a few guys who were, in better shape, who could run a little bit more, could help give us a few easier baskets that, we just couldn't really get throughout the season. There's one thing I kind of want to talk about actually, that I'm seeing this in Taiwan, and I don't know how this is with all the different countries, but my experience has been back-to-back Asian countries with this, with Vietnam and Taiwan. When you're working with an expansion team, you're building from the ground up, but a lot of the teams have, they kind of have, all the bigs, all the main bigs taken from a lot of, through the country. there's not a lot of bigs that go through the cracks where it's just like, hey, this guy, like, why doesn't he have a job? So your roster can end up being a lot smaller than you expect. And that actually kind of fits into the style that I want to go a little bit, but it's not like I want too many small players to where, you're going up against some size and, rebounding takes a hit or, you just get killed in the paint. I think that's something that's unique that I didn't think about as much at first was, trying to get size early on. And, with the countries that I've been in, there's not a lot of players that have a lot of size. And so building the roster with back-to-back expansion teams becomes very difficult. And that's something that I think can benefit us by trying to find, size, this second time around, or, trying to find a way to make it work with, maybe get some more talent at the guard positions rather than having size just to have size if, they're not as good of a player.
Definitely, and it's right. That's a super important thing. Is not just right having it just a hat. Right, there's actually to be a reason behind everything you're doing when you're building a team. It's not just because that's the way we've always done it, or because that's just the way basketball should be played. Where we just have let's just get a big guy just because they have a big guy. Right? There has to be a reason behind everything you do, and thank you for bringing that up because it's important, right, for us to realize that instead of just blindly building a team because that's the way it looks on 2K, or that's the way it should look. Right, there has to be a rhyme or a reason behind why we do it. But then thinking about this next chapter for you in Taiwan, that you're about to leave. In a few weeks to go do that and to really just continue this basketball journey on as a head coach internationally again for the second time, right? Maybe having learned a lot from the last experience you just had. I mean, what are you really excited for? What can we kind of expect? And I mean, the last question I would want to know is how can I watch and try to follow you when you're there?
Yeah, I think all the games will be broadcast on YouTube. I think I don't know if this is how it is during the season or they do it after, but what I've been able to see when watching the games, they have actually a Chinese broadcast and an English broadcast for a lot of the games. So that was one thing when, I had friends or family watching some of the games in Vietnam. They're like, hey, I watch the games. I don't understand anything they're saying, but, they can hear the players' names and they enjoyed it. I think with, Plus League here out in Taiwan, I've seen both broadcasts. I don't know if both of those are live at the same time, but you might have access to both. And, just by going on, I think just by subscribing to, the Plus League on YouTube, you should be able to see all those games. And, with the time difference, obviously some of the times might be, tough if you want to watch a game at like, whether that's 4 a.m. or 5 a.m, but all the games are on there from the past season. And I assume that's going to be the same for this upcoming season. But one of the big things I'm excited about is, working with another expansion team, you kind of get to start from scratch. So expectations aren't incredibly high for everyone. You're trying to build everything, try to get some momentum going for your team. But there's a lot of excitement at the same time because you don't know what to expect. So getting, a lot of guys who are hungry, whether that it's through youth, whether it's guys who want a second chance to, maybe, the last team they're with, they didn't fit in their system very well and they want to give it, another shot. I think finding a mix of youth plus some veteran leadership is important. So trying to figure that out with our roster, trying to get the right imports, but, not even on the basketball side of thing. I think our ownership over there is great and they want to do the right thing. So, getting strength coaches, trying to get, all these systems in place so these players can succeed, not just, in between the lines, but, after they leave the practice court, they have, a weight system, nutrition, all the stuff off the court that makes them feel comfortable and welcome as well. We're trying to do as much as we can. So it's a full experience for them. And it's not just, hey, come in, get out just because, you're a player and we're just, running a business. We want to make it a full family atmosphere. And I think everybody on board from, the staff to the front office to the ownership, everyone's trying to do the right thing. And the communication's been great. So it's really exciting to get started over there.
That's how you're going to find success, by building that sort of culture, right? Bring that together with the system you described just a little bit earlier, and how you're going to really take a lot of steps into doing exactly what you want. And like it's everything's gonna be built with a purpose. So I'm excited to see it. We'll make sure to keep in touch so I can kind of know where I can find these games and where I can kind of start following you as you continue on this next chapter of your journey. And Coach Ryan, really excited to have had you on. Really learned a lot about all this overseas stuff that I really don't get to hear about from a lot of guests. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this with us.
No, I appreciate you having me, John. Like I said, we'll stay in touch and, keep you posted any way I can help moving forward. So thanks again for having me.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.